lab will concentrate mostly on the defining of how to define the mapping parameters and how to define the mapping variables and what are the different variable functions that we have in Informatica and how to use them and how do we use them. And where and all we can use the mapping parameters and variables, that is in the filter transformation, router, source qualifier, expression transformation, all these places. And the mapping parameters and the variables can be defined from the mapping designer itself. So in this example, this lab is actually designed to understand the different functions, different variable functions. It is nothing to do in terms of a functionality, just designed to understand how the different variable functions works. So to use that, we have designed this lab. Let's say you have something called as a table called as employee table, and I'll read the data from employee table and then I'll load the data into another target table called as MP_MB example. So this is just a dummy table which is created for this hands-on lab. So let me just import a table. So I think I have already the employee table which is available, and I'm going to load the data by extracting the data from employee and then load it into the target. So my target table is available in the TDBU schema. So let me just import TDBU, and then you have the TDBU which is available. So just connect to it, and the tables, what is that? The table is MP_MB example. So we will understand how to define the parameters and how to pass the parameters, and at the same time how to use the variable functions that we have. And I'm defining a new mapping to understand this. So click on create, and then this one M_MB example. This is the target table name which I have. So drag and drop the source table, and I would like to define the one mapping parameter and a few variables. So just to understand the different usage of functions. So I'm going to define the parameter called as a bonus. Bonus is something that which changes every year for an employee, and I just want to pass that value dynamically before calculating the total salary. If you look at the target table, in the target table we have total salary, maximum salary variable, and then the minimum, and then the count, and then the set function, how it works. So the total salary is a combination of salary plus commission plus bonus. Bonus is something that which we actually pass it from the parameter file, and then use it. So let me just define the parameters and variables. To define it, go to the mapping and click on parameters and variables. Now I have this. I'm going to define a parameter called as a bonus, which is a parameter I would like to define. So what is difference between the parameter and a variable is that parameter is like a constant. I mean, during the session run, this parameter value will not change during the session run. Suppose if you are passing 1000 from the parameter file, or you are initializing the parameter file as 1000, this value doesn't changes, and it will not get saved onto your repository database. So it is a constant throughout the session run. So let me just, if you want to define this as a decimal of 10,2, then use it. And the next one is we need a few more variables. So I just want to identify the maximum salary variable by just comparing this one. So the maximum salary variable, this is a variable again, and let me just define this as a 10,2, and the aggregation you can select it as a maximum. And similarly, you can also use a minimum salary variable just to identify the minimum salary among the two values. I'm just going to use this as well, and you can call this aggregation as a minimum. I want to count the rest of employees and in this, so I'll just define one more variable So this variable I'm just going to use to increment the count, and this is also so this I just want to, there is a aggregation type of account. If you mark this data type as an integer, then only the aggregation type count will be available. If you mark it as a decimal, then that is not available. And I also want to understand how to initialize a variable. So that's why I'm again using one more variable called a set variable, and this is also a variable because I'm going to initialize the date time. So I'm defining this as a date time, and the aggregation type can be anything because it will be ignored by it. Now I have initialized, I have defined the parameters. So when you define the parameter, there are few values that you can define. So whenever you are defining something, this is called as an initial value. There are three things totally that you have to understand. What is the default value, initial value, and then the repository value, and then the value which is passed in the parameter file. When your integration service is actually evaluating the value for a parameter or a variable, the order of the execution is something like this. So whenever you define something and you're not passing anything from the parameter file, if it is a decimal, if it is a number, numeric family, whatever the data type, it will be initialized as a 0. So initial value for any parameter or a variable for a numeric values, it will be 0. So if it is a string, initial value for a string will be the empty string. So it will just be the empty string. And if you define any parameter as this, it will just use it as a 1. This is not the initial value, rather this is called as a default value. So if you're not providing any value for any parameter and you're not passing any value, then it will be initialized as this. So that is a default value. Initial value is something that which you can provide here, that we have seen during the other lookup lab. So this is the unconnected lookup lab. So the initial value which can be provided for any of them, and then initial value will be provided. So and you can also pass the variable value, variable or a parameter value from the parameter file. That is also possible. So whenever you do this, so how do whenever you do this, like how this will get evaluated, to user. So let's understand how this will get evaluated in the after completing this hands-on lab. So now I have defined all the parameter files. I just want to calculate the total salary, maximum salary, minimum salary, and all those values by using the expression transformation. So let me just create one expression transformation and then calculate all the required values for me. So to use it, expression mb underscore mb example. So click on create and then done. So we have a employee number, employee name. So what and all are required? So only those things we can take it. Employee number, employee name, and then the department number is required. Employee number, employee name, and then the department number. And along with this, I also need a salary, commission, these values to calculate the total salary. Salary and then the commission. And you have even a hire date which is used to initialize the date, for a set variable function that we need it. And now I want to populate the total salary value, maximum salary, and all those things. So let me just define all these values. So let me just call these as inputs because I'm not going to take them to the output. Let me define different variable functions here. So first thing is to calculate the total salary. So which is nothing but I'm defining a output variable called as out underscore total salary, and the data type is decimal here, and then n,2. So the total salary is a combination of salary plus commission plus bonus. Bonus is something is a parameter which I will pass it from the parameter file. So when you go to this, what are the ports? Salary, and we can't add a null value. If at all the commission is null, it will get evaluated as a null. So I'm just replacing that null by the different value. So whenever a commission is null, if is null of commission, if this is true, replace that by 0, else use the commission value whatever is available. So you have a commission plus and then the bonus. So how can you access the parameters and how can you replace the parameters in the expression? Go to the variable tab. You have here a mapping parameter. Just use that. This will now be the combination of, addition of salary plus commission plus the bonus. So validate it, expression passed successfully. And I have calculated the total salary, which is a combination. Similarly, I have to calculate the maximum salary. So by using the different functions. So let me just copy this and then paste it here. And I want to calculate the maximum salary. To calculate the maximum salary out of two values, whatever you pass, there is a function that which is available called as a set max variable function. And that set max variable function takes the two arguments. So all the variable functions, whatever you use, all the variable functions will be available here. There is a set max variable, set min variable, set variable, and set count variable. So use the set max variable here, and this will take the two arguments, and it will compare the values, and whichever is the maximum value, that will be assigned to the variable. Suppose let's say I have a variable called as a dollar minimum salary variable, and I just want to compare what is the value present in this variable with my column value which is coming from the source. So what does a set max variable function works? How does a set max variable function works? Suppose let's say you have a minimum, this is the maximum one. You have a maximum salary variable. So if the maximum salary variable holds the value as 1000, so assume that, and the salary value which is coming from the source is 800. It will compare both the values 1000 and 800, whichever is the maximum. Here 1000 is maximum, so the 1000 will only be retained. So when you compare one more value, let's say from the source, you are getting it as a 2000. It will compare both the values 1000 and 2000, and 2000 is a maximum value, so it will assign the 2000 value to your variable. So what you have to understand here, whenever it is comparing the two values, always your variable will get the maximum value out of both. So it will compare that and it will assign that value here. So similarly, the set max variable function is to understand whichever is the maximum, that it will be assigned over here. And similarly, you can also use the set minimum variable function. Set minimum variable function, which just works in opposite way. It will compare both the values and it will give you the minimum salary, whichever is there. It will assign that value to the variable, whatever you have defined. So that is a set minimum variable function. And what is a port? What is a variable that you have defined? So you can just use it, and minimum salary variable, and the column name is salary. So it will compare both the values, whichever is the minimum. The same value will be assigned to this one. So out underscore minimum salary. So whenever you want to populate any sequence number, or whenever you want to populate any number with any of this, so you can use a set count variable function. So now I'm defining one as a out underscore count variable. So let's say this is a integer. This is an integer value, or you can even define it as a big int. So now whenever you want to increment, so it can always be increment record by 1. It can always increment a record by 1. And whenever you want to populate even any sequence generated column, you can always use this. So set count variable function will take only one argument. So when you see, it will take only one argument, and it always increments the value by 1. So whatever the value that is being incremented, it will get saved onto the repository database. So the next time when your session runs, it will pick up the value what is present in the repository and then start from there, unless you provide a value in the parameter file. So when you go to the variables, here you have something called as a count variable. So count variable, I'm not passing any value, so it will be initialized as a 0, and it will get incremented by 1 by 1. So validate, expression passed successfully. Now out underscore count variable is this. And similarly, we have to also understand how does a set variable function works. set variable function works. This is a date time, and this is also an output port. So whenever you want to initialize any value, this variable, set variable function can be used. So first thing is to get the function, set variable function. Now I have defined one variable as set variable, and then which value you would like to initialize. I would like to initialize the value with the head date column. So just this value, whatever the value that is coming from the source, will be assigned to this. It is just for initialization of the data. Set variable function will be used to do that. Now here in this lab, what we try to understand here is that how does a set max variable function works? Set minimum variable, set count variable, and set variable function will work to understand. So just assign it and then click on OK. Now you have all the required values which are to be populated onto the target. You have this one, m_np_mv example. So you have employee number, employee name, and then the department number. So just assign that, and the total salary is this, and you have a max variable function, and then the minimum variable function, and then the count variable, whichever is it, and then the set variable function. So we'll also see in this example how can you actually define a parameter within the session and then pass it to this. So save this, and then expression is valid. So let me just quickly generate the workflow for it. So generate the workflow, and workflow with a reusable session or non-reusable. And the employee table is there in the source_pick, and this table is there in the target schema. So just assign this value as well, and click on next. Next. Finish. So the workflow is generated now. Workflow is generated. And let me just go to the workflow manager to run all this. So workflow would have got generated from the wizard, whatever we have seen. Let's see how to pass the values through the parameter. So machine has struck here. Wait a moment. Sorry about that. It has struck. For some reason, it's not responding here. Yeah, meanwhile, if you have any questions so far what we have discussed, I think we can just discuss that. Let me just close this. So we'll have this is a workflow which is being generated, and I just want to pass the bonus value and other values and to check. And this is a employee, and we have assigned the connection service, and then I'm going to pass the parameter file. Let me just define a parameter file in my source file directory. I'm going to pass the parameter values for a bonus, and even for a variables also you can pass the values from the parameter. So we'll see how to define the parameter file and how to pass these things. So let me just go to my source file directory, which is in the infra shade directory, Informatica 901 server infra shade, then the source files. So here I can define any parameter file, whatever the name that is. So we can define a .txt or .prm or anything. So let me just rename this. So ODS underscore ETW big, and then you need a, I'm using a target table name. So let me just use it as a .txt itself. And the parameters can be, as I discussed yesterday, it can be defined at the session level, folder level, integration service level, or any level. You can define that. And to check, so it's always a good practice to define at the session level. So for each session, we generally define the parameters. And let me just copy the session name and then assign that values. So enclose your session name in the square brackets. And the next thing is to define the parameter file names. So we have the parameter file names. You should make sure that you are correctly inputting here. And I'm passing the 5000 as a bonus or 500 as a bonus, and it will pass this value whatever you're defining this thing into a mapping parameter before even your mapping starts executing the value. And similarly, you can also pass the variables. You can also pass the variable values for a variables. It will use the values which is available. So let me just get the variable names from here. So when I go to mapping parameters and variables, here I have something called as a max salary variable and max min salary variable. So if you define here as a max salary variable is equal to 4000 or something, it will compare this 4000 value, whatever you are passing, with the source values. If 4000 is bigger, it will populate the value 4000 for that employee, or if the source is having a bigger value, it will populate this. And I also want to understand, do we have any employee who is receiving a minimum salary which is less than 700? Minimum salary which is less than 700. So just want to understand also this. And also, I'm not initializing any values for account variable and then the set variables. So if you're not initializing something in the parameter file, first it will look in the repository. Whenever your variable value is incremented or decremented or something is being modified on the variable value, it gets saved onto your repository database. So how your integration service will evaluate the data? First, it will check for a value in the parameter file. If it is not present, then it will check in the repository database. If it is not present in the repository database, then it will look for an initial value defined in the mapping parameter or a mapping parameter in the mapping level. If that is not available, then it will initialize with a default value. So how the variable or a parameter variable evaluation will happen? First, parameter file, it will look for the value. Next is that it will look in the repository database. If it has a value, it will use a repository database value. Then it will go and check for an initial value. If the initial value is present, then it will use it. Else, it will assign the default value for a mapping variable. So the parameter file, repository database, initial value, and then the default value. This is all. Now I'm not providing any value for account variable function. So there is no value which is saved in the repository database also. And I'm not defined even the initial value also. It will go and choose the default value as 0 and then start incrementing the records by one. And the set variable function, it will just initializes the value and the same value will be populated. So let me just save all of them, and now I have saved this parameter file and let me copy the path of the parameter file where the file is present and just assign this. So the parameter file name is this, and you have parameter file path, and then the file name is this one where you have ODS underscore MP underscore MP example. So .txt, then apply it and click on. Now you have updated it. So your integration service will read the parameter values and the variable values, and it will pass it to the mapping. So before proceeding with this, I would like to actually truncate my target table because I have already the data present in this, which I'm actually loaded for a other batch. So let me just truncate the target table before actually making an entry of the new data and save it. And let me just run the workflow. So here a main aim of this lab is that to understand how to pass the parameter files and how to use the different variable functions, set max variables, set min variables, and also to understand how your variable evaluation will happen in the Informatica. How your integration service will evaluate the variables assignment. So if you look at it, you can easily understand what is the value. So you can open you can check the session log and then find out what is the values that are being passed. Whenever you have a mapping parameter and a variable, it will show you the values here, what value it has used. It has used 500 for a bonus. For a count, it has used a default value. Default value for a count variable, since it is a number, it will use a 0. And this mapping variable value 4000, I'm passing it from here, so it has used 4700. And I have also not initialized any value for a set variable function, so it is used a default value. So once the value is incremented, check it out. So the variable functions will get saved onto the repository database. Check here, mapping variable name max salary variable persisted value 5000 is being saved onto the repository database. Persisted means it's nothing but it is saved to the repository database. Minimum variable function is being saved, and the count variable function which is being incremented to 15. So when you run the mapping next time, it will not go to 0 and then start it again. Rather, it will evaluate the value from the repository database, because you're not passing any value in the parameter file. You're not passing any, there is some value which is present in the repository database, so it will use it. So likewise, it will use it. And the last value which is being initialized is a 23/1/1982. So that value is being saved. So all the variable values, whatever you are incrementing to, this will get saved onto your repository database. So this lab is to understand how the max variable function works and how the min variable function and the count variable, and also the evaluation of the variable codes. How the evaluation will happen for variables. So when you try and see, you will have a data here. So there is no salary which is minimum than the 700 here. So that's why you have populated. So all these employees' salary is less than 4000. That's why the 4000 maximum salary is being populated. And this employee king is receiving more than this. So it is being reinitialized. From this, again, you have a 5. And if you see the count variable function, it is being incremented from 1 to 15. And the set variable function, what you have is just initialized. So set variable function, whenever you want to initialize a variable with any value, that you can use it. So that is how the different mapping. So these mapping variables will be mostly useful for an incremental data loading process. Incremental data loading. So we'll see how the incremental data loading will be implemented by using a mapping variables. By using a mapping variables, that also can be understood according to that. So that is the end of your lab number 28, and how you actually use mapping parameters and the variables, mapping parameters and the variables to use it, right? So any questions on this so far? Okay, so okay, that's fine. So now we are done with almost all the hands-on labs, which till the ODS level. So if you look at the list of tables that we have seen in the initial classes, right? So when you check it, we have something called as a project table list here. So if you look at it, so far we have spent almost, we have covered almost 20 to 20 labs in just integrating the data from your OLTP system into ODS area. And from ODS now, and from the ODS, I'm going to load the data into dimension tables and the fact tables. So the dimension tables, when you're loading the data, these dimension tables can be of either a slowly changing dimension type 1 or type 2 based upon the type 1 or a type 2 or a type 3. So we will see how to load the slowly changing dimension type 1 and how to load the slowly changing dimension type 2 and type 3 and type 3. So this part we will take it up. Now, so far we have loaded the data till ODS and how to integrate the data from ODS to our star schema. This is a star schema that we are going to load it. First, we will understand how to load the slowly changing dimension type 1, type 2 and type 3. Later, we will come and then load the data into the star schema tables. So in order to do that, now I will start with a slowly changing dimension type 1. So we will check how we can implement this slowly changing dimension type 1. So when you look at the SCD type 1, we have an example which explains you about the reading of the data from SCD input table, and from there to load the data into another table. So let's understand the source and source table and the target table, and then implement the slowly changing dimension type 1 to use it. So how the SCD type 1 works. So if you could recall what we have discussed in the previous, in the initial level classes about the dimension modeling. So the SCD type 1 is a pretty simple one, and here you have a flat file which is being referred. Instead of that, you can use the relational table which is available in the SCD input. So let me just import the source structure table and the target table. So I have a SCD input which is a source table which is available in the SDBU schema. So let me just import that from this. So use SDBU and then SDBU. So check it out. I think even the SCD input is there. So just click on OK. Look at the structure of the table, how many attributes are there and which is a logical column to compare all those things. So if you look at it, we have a supplier code, supplier name, and then the supplier state. So the supplier code is something that which is a unique to determine the supplier, and you have the other attributes like supplier name and then the supplier state, so which may be modified. In this example, I'm actually taking only few attributes for a simplicity. And in general, the dimension tables will have a large number of attributes. So this supplier code is a unique to determine the supplier, and you have two different attributes, supplier name and the supplier state. Whenever there is a change in the value, we will do it. And the next thing is about the target table. We have a target table which is created in the TDBU schema, wherein you have all the target dimension tables are also available. So you can just import. There is a target table called as a dim underscore supplier 1, which is a SCD type 1. And also observe the structure, what and all are the things that we have it here. We have a supplier code, we have a supplier name, and then the supplier state, and created date and the last updated date. Created date, here the supplier code is a primary key, and you have a supplier name, supplier state, which are the two attributes, and you have audit columns which will be populated by using a sys date or a session start time by using the created date and the last updated date. Created date and the last updated date, which is available. So let me just let's create a mapping, and before talking about the SCD type 1, let's understand what are the things that you have to do it. So whenever there is a change in whenever a record is new to the OLAP system, so whenever a record is new in the OLAP system, what we do in this one, we will insert the data. Whenever a record is existing, whenever a record is existing, means a supplier is already existing and there is a change in the attributes, maybe in the supplier name or there is a change in attributes, then we are going to update the data. We are going to update the data. So whenever a record is new, you do that, you'll insert the data or update the data if it is existing. Now the thing is that how can we determine whether the record is existing in the target table or not? So to determine the record is existing or not, by using a lookup, we can determine. So we'll check the value with the input column, that is the supplier code. If the lookup returns the null value, that means the lookup returns the null value, that means record is new. If the lookup returns the value based on the supplier code, which means returns the value based on the supplier code, then that is a existing. And you're going to update only when there is a change in the attributes from the source to the target. So there is no necessity of updating the records even whenever there is a existence. Whenever there is a record which is existing, and there is it returns the value, and so based on that you can determine whether it is new or a old record or a existing record. So let's try to create a mapping here for a slowly changing dimension type 1. I'm creating a new mapping, and this I'm calling it as m_dim supplier 1. So click on create. So you can just drag and drop the source. Drag and drop the source. And first thing is to determine whether the record is existing or not. To determine the record is existing or not, now I'm creating a lookup table on my target. So what is your target table? That is your lookup_dim supplier 1. Lookup_dim supplier 1. So the dim supplier 1 is already being imported as a target. So just select it and click on OK. So how to compare the data in the lookup? So just pass the supplier code here, and then this is a input. I'm just by default it's a static. So I don't need all the I don't need this created date and the last updated date columns when it is being updated. So let me just create the condition. Condition is going to be the supplier code is equal to supplier code input, and I need all the other values like supplier name and the supplier state. So just click on apply and click on OK. And I'm going to use an expression transformation to determine which record to be inserted and which record to be updated. I'm creating one expression transformation here, exp underscore the dim supplier 1. exp underscore the dim supplier 1. So click on create and then done. So let me just drag and drop all these columns from the lookup, and let me suffix all these columns with underscore LKP just to determine which is coming from the, to just differentiate which is coming from the lookup and which is coming from the source. Just use underscore LKP and you just assign that. And the next thing is you have things which are coming from the source as well. So just drag and drop the things. So suffix them as underscore SRC. So supplier code SRC and supplier name SRC and then the supplier state SRC. You are just going to use this to compare the existence of the data. So I'm just marking all of them as an input only. Now here I'm creating two flags. One is an insert flag, another is a change flag, to determine which record to be inserted and to determine which record to be updated. So I'm creating a new flag called as a insert flag, and which is going to be an output port. So how can you determine the record to be inserted? Whenever a lookup returns the null value, then I have to insert a record, else you're going to update it. So how to check whether the lookup is returning the value or not? So I'm using this condition. If is null of, is null will give you true whenever the supplier code lookup is null, and I'm just using it as a while. So whenever it is null, I'm setting this flag as a while, else n. So if the lookup returns the not null value, set the flag as n. If it is null, then set it as a while. So click on OK. Now you have assigned the insert flag as equal to 1. So the next thing is about the change flag. Next thing is about the change flag to use. String, this one is an output parameter, and here, when are you going to update the record? You are going to update the record whenever a record is existing and there is a change in any one of the attributes. Either there is a change in the supplier name from source to target, or a change in the supplier name, supplier state from source to target. Then only you will update the data. Then only you will update the data. So how to verify the record is existing? If not is null of supplier code lookup. So when you go to the code and then see not is null of supplier code lookup, and whenever a lookup returns the value and there is a change in the attributes. So which attributes? If the supplier name lookup is not equal to supplier name source, or so if any one of these attributes is modified, then I am going to update the data. Supplier state lookup is not equal to supplier state source. If the record is existing and there is a change in any one of these attributes, then I'm going to set the flag as y. I'm going to set the flag as y, and then n is this one. So click on n. So whenever the supplier code lookup is not null and the supplier name lookup is different from source to target, or supplier state is different from source to target, then only I'm going to update the record, else no. There is no need of updating the record on the target table unless there is a change in the attributes from source to target. That is why I have kept this condition. I've kept this condition. So whenever a change flag is equal to y, I'm going to update it, and whenever an insert flag is equal to y, I'm going to insert it. And at the same time, I also need to update the created date column and then the last updated date column. So here I'll call it as out underscore current date, out underscore current date. So this is a date time and this is a output variable. And initialize this as a system date or a session start time. Where can you find the built-in variables? So just go here. Here you'll find the built-in variables. You have a session start time and the system date. So anything is fine. So just use the system date, which will input this. This is the output variable which I'm going to use it to populate the created date and last updated date column. Now we have to divide the data into two groups. One is an insert group, another is an update group. So how can we do that? By using a router transformation. So just use the router transformation. So RTR underscore dim supplier 1, dim supplier 1. So click on create and then done. And let me just drag and drop all the required columns. These are all the required columns which I require. And just drag and drop all of them into router transformation. And rename if required. This current date, whatever is there, let me just rename it. And I'm going to divide the data into two groups. So one is a insert group, another is a update group. One is insert group, another is update group. So when you see the filter condition, so this one, whenever the insert flag is set to y, you have to insert the data. So I'm just writing the condition as insert flag is equal to y. Then you just validate the data, click on OK. And whenever an update flag is y, then we will use this as well. So just use change flag is equal to y, then you're going to update the data. So validate it, and whichever is not modified, I mean the record is existing and there is no change in the attributes, it will grow to default group. I don't need those records to update in my target. So I have a insert group and I have an update group, And I'm going to use two update strategy transformations, one for an insert, another for an update. So just use insert and the update. You need all these columns to be available, and along with this you also need a parent date. So whenever you want to insert a data in the properties expression, update strategy expression, either it should be 0 or dd underscore insert. So I'm just replacing that with a dd underscore insert. So whenever a record pass through this flow, it will insert the data. And similarly, in order to update the data, so just drag and drop, and you require even the current date also to be available. So let me just do this. And here, this update strategy transformation should do only update. That's why I'm using dd underscore update instead of 0. So just validate it and click on OK. So now I need to connect this to the target. So just drag and drop that into your workspace, your target. So we are going to use the same target for insert and update, right? So now supplier code will go to supplier code, and supplier name will go to the supplier name, and supplier state will go to the supplier state. And you have a created date and the last updated date will be same when you are stamping it for the first time. Then you are creating a record. So you are inserting a data into the same target, and you can just drag and drop the same target once more. It will just add a suffix to it. It doesn't mean that you are actually inserting a record, into the table called as a dim supplier 11. Dim supplier 11 table is not available. But if you see the target table which is pointing to this, it is a dim supplier 1. When your integration service is inserting a data, it will use this table rather than the transformation name. This name can be anything. You can just use, this is just a alias name kind of a thing. So this is you're using for update, you can just use any name. This target table, it will use it. So n number of instances, you can use it in the target, n number of instances. So now the supplier code is this, and you have the supplier name which goes here, and then the supplier state. And you don't need to update the created date when you're updating a record, and you need to update only the last updated date, sorry. So this last updated date needs to be updated, not the created date. So this is the end of your SCD type 1 mapping. So what we are doing, we are checking in the lookup whether a record is existing or not. And then we have defined the two flags here. One is the insert flag and the change flag. And if the insert flag is equal to Y, then we will insert the data. Insert flag is equal to, update change flag is equal to Y, we will update the data here. So let me just generate quickly a workflow, and SCD input that we have a table. So let me just generate a workflow for it, and reusable, not reusable doesn't matter. So the SCD input is available in the source, so assign it as a source, and then the target underscore rig is this one, and this is also target underscore rig, and you need to select this lookup is also available in the target. So click on next and then next. So the workflow would have generated for this. So the metadata won't get refreshed, and refresh the metadata that is connecting and then reconnecting into this. So we'll have a workflow here, WF underscore and lim supplier 1. Just verify whether we have all the connections for lookups and everything. And so let me just open this. Okay. So when you go here and verify these values, whether we have all the connections which is being set. So this is fine, and this is pointing to $target. So let me just initialize. Let me just initialize that. Initialize the $target connection variable, which is also target. So it should be a normal mode because you have a primary key which is defined on that. So it should be the normal mode to import. Just apply and save it. Now let's actually test this SCD type 1 from the scratch. That's why I'm just truncating this table and let's see whether our program logic, whatever we have defined, is working fine or not to verify that. So let me just do it from the first. So first time, there are no records in the target table. When you run for a first time, it will all insert the data into the target table. No record will get updated. No record will get updated. To display the timestamp, I'm actually changing the time format of my session, which is NLS date format. So I'm just changing that to dd-mon-yyy hh24mi and then SS. I want to display the timestamp also. That's why I'm just using this. Now, if you check it, you'll not have any records in the which is available in the this one. Supplier 1, you see, there will be no records which are available. There are no records. So let me just load the data and also look at the input data what you have. So hello. Hello. Hello, can you guys hear me? Hello. Hello. Yes. Is it audible now? There is a small network glitch. Is it audible? Can you just please ping me if you can hear me? Hello. Yep.
It's audible, Karthik.
Okay, thank you. So let me just take a look at the input select star from sdbu.scd_input. So when you just try and see, you have almost 18 to 20 records which are available here, 21. So all these records will be inserted for the first time. So there is no record which is existing in your target table. First time you're loading the data, so this will be inserted for the first time. So when you go here, let me just run the workflow, close all this. Let me just close it and run the dim supplier 1 workflow. It will load all the records by bringing up all these 22 records or 21 records, whichever you have. It will load it. So get run properties. It's running it and it will load all the records. For the first time when it is loading, so it will insert all the records. It will not update any of the records. So 21 records, 21 out of 21 is inserted. In order to differentiate, check here. One instance which we have created for inserting the data, 21 records are being inserted, and the update 0 records. This is the first time you're loading, there will be no update happens on this. Now, in order to check the update logic, what I'll do is I'll just actually change one of the supplier name and the supplier state on my source and then rerun it. And also check whether this update logic is working fine or not. Right, supplier name is equal to, so let me just change this supplier name is equal to hospital, and the supplier name whatever you have, I'll just change that to New York. So if you just take a look at it, so for one supplier code I'm just going to modify this. For one supplier code I'm going to modify where supplier code is equal to.
You have to change the supplier code, supplier state.
Yes, I'm just saying that. Thank you. So I'm just changing this value and then let's see whether this value will get updated in the target or not. So now I have updated one record. I'm committing the change. I'm updated in the source table, not on the target table. So if you see sdbu.sad, when I rerun it, it should update the data with the target. Now check the values, how it is present in the source target table. So if you look at it, it is being inserted at 7/7/48 seconds and 15th March 2014. And for a hash supplier code, you have a supplier name is HOSP and then the supplier state is AP. And this will be modified now to change it. So let me just rerun my workflow. And ideally, there should be only one record should get updated and 0 record should get inserted. So just go and check here how many records. Only one record is updated, 0 records inserted, because there is no record. I mean, there is no record which is added newly, which is not present in your target table. And go and see whether your update last updated date is updated for a particular record or not. This is being inserted at 7/7 and this is being updated at 7/10. So which means whatever the logic that you defined, the insert and update logic both are working fine. So you are able to insert a record and update the record. SCD type point doesn't track the historical data. It will just stores the most recent data as per your OLTP system, and it will not maintain the old values. But this looking at the created date and the last updated date, we should be able to determine when the record is created and when the record is updated. So that is how the slowly changing dimension type 1 will be implemented to load the data. It is more or less the same thing like the incremental update what we have done in the lab number 13, but we have just implemented that by using a different example and then the different input. We have done that, right? So that's how we implement the SCD type 1. So if you have any questions now, you can just go ahead. That's it. I have it for today, and we'll discuss if you have any questions, and then we can close this. And the next class will be on Monday night, US EST. Okay then, thank you.